Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back.
Welcome to Speak Up, and thank you for joining us. I have Denise McIntosh again as a guest. And today's show is going to be focusing on parents and parents' rights regarding 169C of New Hampshire law and the initial intake of information, whether you're facing with the courts or with DCYF, and the process and the hang-ups and the things that you need to know. You need to be aware of these things when DCYF comes knocking on your door, or you're before a judge and you're a pro se litigant in a family matter. So welcome back to the show, Denise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to applaud you for a lot of the homework that you're doing and the research that you're doing on behalf of the families here in New Hampshire. Now, just for our guests, you are an independent paralegal. What does that mean?
It means that I take contract work. So one given day I could be working for an attorney, working on motions or coordinating their research on a case. I could be working for, there's several banks that I work for where I do investigations on security measures for credit applications.
Mm-hmm. Now, if a person wants to file a petition with the state, according to Article 31 or 32, and a petition for redress, one of your gifts is to be able to take their evidence and be able to categorize it, index it, and make it very presentable for the Redress of Grievance Committee. Is that correct?
Correct. What I would do is I'd look at their case. I can't give them legal advice, but I would go through the process that they went through, look at all their evidence that was actually submitted to the court, and then have their evidence on the side that wasn't submitted or wasn't accepted. And then we would look at the laws, insert the laws that don't seem to match up to the way that the orders came out.
Right.
Compared to the motions that went in from both sides.
What we're learning, well, we've learned, it was a growing process with the redress of grievance, is that when people come to our committee and they would have boxes and boxes of evidence, and the committee members look at that and they say, what do you want us to do with this? It's very difficult for them to hear 32 cases and there be piles and piles of evidence. And what we've learned to do is help them along by narrowing down the scope of their petition, making a statement. For instance, Judge so-and-so made a statement or an order which violates statute or violates an order or violates
an administrative order.
An administrative order.
Like the guardian ad litems exceeding the $1,000 cap or
Right.
something like that.
Right, or billing in advance to their overages, all these things. And so having this evidence lined up is very important. Now today's show is going to be basically about 169C. And what does that mean? What is 169C?
169C is a Child Protection Act in New Hampshire. And listening to several people that have come before the committee, I found that there's just a lot of misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. To begin with, when you're confronted with the Child Protection Act, anybody in the state of New Hampshire makes a report. So they're calling this office called Central Intake. Central Intake will take in the information. They'll go through some trigger points. They'll see that if there was a call-in before, they go back. If the report prior to was unfounded, they'll hold it for 3 years. If it was founded, they hold it for 7 years. Mm-hmm. So they'll go back that far. They'll look. They'll be, I think we need to send a social worker out. So they'll have a social worker go out to do a well child check. Once the social worker or the social worker will get there. You do not have to let them into your house.
Yeah. Let me just stop you right there just for a second. So, in other words, I'm going to create a scenario. You have a neighbor. You're parked in that neighbor's spot enough times to where that neighbor's really mad at you. That neighbor says, listen, I'm going to get you. I'm going to call DCYF because you have two children that, they seem dirty all the time. So I'm going to call you in as an anonymous pain in the neck and accuse you of child abuse. I'm really making this up, but it can happen.
It can happen, unfortunately, exactly like that. And children get dirty.
Right, okay. And so now, DCYF, hi, I'm with the state. I'd like to help you. Could we have a moment? And basically, this is how it's going to happen. They'll walk in your house and they'll have all these forms for you.
Right, but you don't have to let them into your house. And you can send them away and tell them to come back with a copy of the incident description that they're there about. And that is the first thing you should ask for, no matter what. You should have that. In a lot of cases, these people come during the day when most parents are working and children are in school, and they'll leave a note on the door, they'll leave their card, or they might try to call if they have a phone number. And the social worker just, leave the card. Some people will call it. The catch here is that during 60 days, if the social worker doesn't get a hold of you for that incident report, the case is just closed, unfounded. When in a lot of cases, we've had children drop in the school system in Nashua and they finally came in, and then we find out later that neighbors had made 363 calls during the year and they did nothing because they kept evading that. So that's a problem. But on the other side, there's parents that haven't done anything, and they don't have to let these people in the house. They should ask for the incident description. They should say, I want the intake assessment. So you'll look at it, it'll say, oh, there is a child there. Now they're going in, the police are calling whenever there's a domestic violence incident. So they're going in to check on the parent and the child to see if they're well. They're supposed to talk to them separate from the abuser.
Right. Kind of like in the doctor's office, the doctor will separate you from the parent and have a look at the child. Are you okay? Type of thing.
Right. And, the parents don't have to let them into the house. They can produce the child, show them outside. The child's fine. Yep, I'm going to be fine, or I'm looking for a place to go. And they're supposed to help you. They're supposed to give you the resources for domestic violence centers. They're supposed to set you up with somebody who can talk to you.
I've had cases in the past where kids were actually taken from schools. Is that possible?
It is possible if there is police involved. There was,
what if there's a pregnancy involved?
The student's pregnant or the
student. I've heard of cases in the past where children were actually, oh, you're pregnant, you don't want your parents to know, we'll take you to a facility. And
that is not supposed to happen, and it's not supposed to happen under the law then or now. Before children were, for a short while, there was legislation where the children could get an abortion without their parents' knowledge. Now they do have to go through a court proceeding to get it done. But abortion is an invasive procedure, and it can ruin a young woman's body. So her parents need to know, because a lot of kids, and although New Hampshire has some better facilities, I guess, than other places because it's had legalized abortion for a long time, they can still bleed out. There are still numerous things that can happen to them.
So the parents need to be notified.
Need to know,
right.
Because they need to know. They need to watch for signs. They need to watch for signs of fever.
Right.
Anything could go wrong, especially with a young woman.
Right. That was a side issue.
They're safer having the baby.
Right.
And there's many facilities that they can go to on both sides, whether they want the abortion or they want to keep the baby, to help them through that process. And there's no reason for DCYF to get involved unless they're under the law of New Hampshire. If they're a drug addict, New Hampshire can get involved, and they can be incarcerated during the rest of their pregnancy so that they don't harm the fetus. But at the same time, vehicular homicide on a fetus is not murder.
Yeah,
So
I didn't want to. I didn't want to get too sidetracked, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but-
I've just heard horror stories where children were actually taken from school without the parents noticed.
They
And
have to notify the parents.
So back on 169C, DCYF comes back to your house. They knock on the door. They heard a complaint. You can demand this, basically, right to know who complained against me.
Right,
Right, and then what if they don't produce it? You don't have to cooperate.
right. They have to produce the intake assessment, and if they go to the Attorney General's website, they have a task force on child abuse and neglect, and it is their protocols. So it tells them what they have to produce when people ask for it. They have to produce that. And they have to produce a pamphlet that gives families their rights. You know, there's an ombudsman's office that you can
Right.
call and talk to. You have the right to an attorney. You don't have to let us in the house. They're supposed to be able to look that over, read it, and that's the only thing that they sign for. They'll have one sheet that says, okay, did you receive your rights booklet?
Right.
And then you sign it. And if that's not in the case file later, that's an issue because they weren't given their rights. They didn't know what their rights were or
It's
what
kind of
they
like
were
a
getting
Miranda
into.
rights, similar.
Right.
Now, you have another form here that you were talking about, and this is the application for funding for,
Title 4A funding for services. It covers community-based services, residential care, emergency assistance, transportation, child care, child health support, child in-home care, home-based therapeutic services, intensive home and community outreach and tracking, which is why they're there in the first place.
so all this stuff sounds kind of good.
Right, respite care, transportation, alcohol, diagnostic evaluations, family counseling, group outpatient counseling, individual counseling, residential care facility, therapeutic foster care, foster family care, and board. However, this form is a contract between you and the state, and as such, every contract should be read. But an application for Title IV funding for services, it gives the referral case number. So now you already know that you're part of the system because they've assigned a case number to you. The date of referral is the date that they went out there. The CPSW or the JPPO, if it's a juvenile case, puts their initials here. If they check off abuse, neglect, chins, or delinquency and are not giving you a copy of the exact same thing, don't sign it because that's already indicating that you have guilt, either that, yes, you have some abuse in the house, or yes, you know, you're being neglectful, or yes, my child is not going to school.
So on this form, if you'll get all these services according to them.
You
and-
could get any of the
any of those
services that
services.
you need.
But if they say, here's your case number, and here's, you automatically know, like you said, you're in the system, and you sign it, what's to prevent them from, hey, you know what, I'm going to check off one of these?
Exactly, which is why, no, and they're not giving copies. They have you sign this, it goes back with them. They bought, when I did this with other people, they bought me a blank copy. I'm like, well, where's her copy? They're like, well, this is what we're filling out. I could check it off, and I'm like, but that's not a copy with your signature on it. And so she can't sign it. But
So
the thing is,
the idea is you wouldn't sign this.
I wouldn't sign
because
this, and I wouldn't recommend that anybody sign something that signs away that they're guilty of something.
Right.
Or, you know, gives any indication that they're guilty when they're there for these things to prove or disprove them. It's the start of their investigation. So it should say that they're there for outreach and tracking, because they're tracking a central intake call.
Which you have a right to know what that central intake call is.
Exactly. So if you're just out there for outreach and tracking to see if there's any validity to this call, or you need to investigate further, why do I have to sign something that says I'm already guilty?
So we've had cases in DCY where DCYF has actually had the intervention where a child was in the hospital and they took a child. And
There's been several cases like that in New Hampshire, and it's just appalling. So here you are, you're so excited, you're going to have a baby. You're in the hospital, you know, you go through labor. I believe one of the cases was 10 or 12 hours. You're tired, you're just so excited. You know, there's nothing that's happened in your life up to that point. to say that you're a bad parent because you've never been a parent, or, you know, there's never been a problem with any of your other kids. And then DCYF walks in and they take your child because in one case, the father belonged to a group that they thought might be outrageous. In another case, they thought that the mother would do harm to the child in the future.
Without ever having any type of evidence that they could show.
What could they show?
Based on hearsay.
The child was born in both of the two cases that I really looked at, both of the children were born, they're in the hospital, the parents didn't have any chance to go anywhere with them, the nurses weren't the ones complaining, and why? I mean, what could they have possibly done to this child between delivery and going to the prenatal unit and coming back?
What is their incentive to do this?
Adoptions.
All right, you said you had met with some people and they were talking about how adoptions are up and foster care is up in the state of New Hampshire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
they said more children are going into foster care now and being placed. Isn't that great? I'm like,
is that the primary function of DCYF, to take kids out of homes and put them in foster care?
no, the purpose of this chapter is to provide protection to children whose life, health, or welfare is endangered, and to protect the rights of all parties involved in the adjudication of child abuse or neglect cases. And I'm skipping over some things, but preferably in their own home. And if the child should be removed from the control of his parent, guardian, or custodian, adequate care shall be secured for the child. So it seeks to coordinate efforts by state and local authorities in cooperation with private agencies and organizations, citizens groups, and concerned individuals to protect the safety of the child. But they're supposed to preserve the unity of the family whenever possible. So they're supposed to give them in-home services. You know, maybe somebody got laid off from a job and, you know, you talk to their neighbors and this isn't their usual course of how they interact with each other, but things, you know, so many things have happened, or they've lost their home. And, you know, even if you're homeless, you still shouldn't lose custody of your child.
You know what? We just saw, it was 60 Minutes last night. I watched the program, 60 Minutes, and they were talking about how that a family, a few families in Florida, they were living in their trucks. They were living in their vehicles, and they were very leery of the state because the state would come and take their children away. And what they did is they worked as hard as they could to find work, and eventually they did find work. But one of their biggest worries was the state breaking up the family and putting those children into a foster care because dad lost his job. Mom was sick, or something to that effect.
Or the mortgage crisis.
Or
they had the balloon mortgages, and a lot of really good people lost their homes.
Yeah. So poverty happens.
It does. And it can happen to anybody at any time.
That doesn't give the state the right to take away your child.
No, it actually says in the law that that's not supposed to be one of the reasons that they take them away.
Now, this is 169C, found where? In the New Hampshire?
So the New Hampshire judicial site, you can just look them up, type in 169C, and it'll pop right up. And it's here, it is about 38 pages if you print it out.
Which are the guidelines to your rights, to children's rights and the care?
Right, so it goes over the purpose. It has definitions for people, you know, what the adjudicatory hearing is. And that's to determine the truth of the allegations in the petition filed under the chapter. There's also some special things that they should know. I mean, your consent order, the number of hearings that you go through, what a founded report means, you know, that they have an authority and duty to provide reasonable visitation, you know, except to such an extent that it's been limited by the court. But even then, the court is supposed to give you supervised visits.
See, I think in the Dion case, was it the Dion case, or there was another case where that wasn't even allowed? That's why it was founded there. The child was just taken. And
no visits.
No visits.
The other problem that came up here, too, that they have access to all of the schools. So they're putting these children in foster care instead of calling extended family members. And they're like, well, sometimes the families won't give me the information, Denise. Or sometimes, we're taking them out of school, or, we took them off the playground, and I'm like, But every child has a school record card. Even if they're homeschooled, there's emergency contact information. So they can go right there. They can call their emergency contact information, say, look, we're looking into this. Can you take the child for a while? Boom, you save cost. The child is with somebody somebody that they know. And as long as they don't have a record, what's the problem?
See, in the Knightley case, I believe that the Jay Sinclair wasn't even notified, and he actually petitioned to become the extended family.
Wasn't that the father that they put the wrong name in the newspaper?
They put the wrong name, and they couldn't find him. Who knows where he was at? But the bottom line is that extended family members, whether it was Dot Knightley or her brother or uncle, they're local, very good records, no complaints, no problems. They could have been notified. They just totally dismissed them. Totally.
Yeah, and I believe that family had like siblings too, older siblings with children that.
So the sidestepping, the problem that we're seeing and we're facing is we've got to hold these agencies accountable to the people, and that's it's time that people start understanding that they do have their rights. The state has to be accountable. These people are not untouchable. So that's one of the reasons for this show and one of the reasons for the Redress of Grievance Committee.
But that's one of the other things. These community-based services and residential care, well, residential care, they do go through a pretty ornate process, because I was a foster mother, so I went to the classes and all the things that the 169C says to ensure a good relationship between the family. That's what they teach foster parents. It's not actually what they do. And then, but these other community-based services that they're recommending to these families, there's no credentialing.
What do you mean by credentialing? So you're saying DCYF sends you to this particular organization that's funded by the federal government or gets matching funds?
Or partial funds.
Under Title D,
Title II.
2D, 4D, one of the
Right.
other. So
CAPA,
this
Title
money,
II for CAPA for some of these community-based projects.
This money gets imported from the federal government, and then instead of going directly to the children, it goes to these organizations in a 501c3 or some type of...
Right. Instead of going to the family to help the family stay together and stay intact, as the statute says that they're pushing for, and getting them the services so they can stay in the home environment and have, well child checks or well family checks, they're giving them into these community-based support programs that leverage funds from a variety of sources. Some of them have foundations set up, but the New Hampshire Trust Fund provides technical assistance and support. They provide resources and type of trainings to these family support networks. But the family support networks, there's no oversight. So, for instance, DCYF receives an audit every year, or not every year, but every several years from the federal government. So there's been 2 rounds. They've failed both rounds. And they take...
Was that public? Was that public knowledge?
It's public record.
DCYF New Hampshire failed a federal audit twice.
Twice.
What years?
For the last 20. It goes over, I believe it goes over a 5-year period. So they're called CFSR, Child and Family Service Reports. And if you go to the Department of Health and Human Services, the government site, you can type in CFSR and it'll pop right up. And you type in your state and it'll tell you how you're doing and what they failed in and what they're not doing right. The concerning part is that if you're failing and they've gone to 12 district offices and they've taken a random sample of 50 cases in those offices and determined you failed off of those 50 cases, what are we going to find if we did all the cases? Or 90% of the cases? Especially when the attitudes are all the same, and the services, there's no oversight. There's nobody checking them to see if they're all doing the same thing. Are they all following the same methodology that we know works?
Are these licensed facilities by the state of New Hampshire?
I'm still checking into that. Some of them appear to have some licensing if they have psychologists on board. Some of the other smaller family support ones do not look like they have licensing.
They don't have licensing.
No, because I don't believe they would need them if there's no credentials needed. But I'm double checking, so I haven't gotten them.
Stay tuned.
But it just gets worse. So they need to ensure that they have reasonable visitation because, especially with young children, there's separation anxiety. These children are then becoming medicated in the system, because they're upset and they're out of control because they want to see their parents. A really big surprise, no matter what, even if the child was being abused, he is going to be, that's all he knows or she knows, and they want to see that parent, you know what I mean, until they get in an environment where they feel better, and start making new relationships. They still need visitation. When the state does TPRs, which are termination of parental rights, they have a process to get the child unattached from the parent, but they don't do it in all of these cases. They take these children, they put them into St. Charles Place or other homes within the state, and of course they're upset, and then they drug them.
Did I hear you correctly that they have a process to get a child unattached from a parent?
Right, when they
terminate their rights as parents.
Right.
Is there a statistic saying how many children are terminated from their parents in the state of New Hampshire?
There are, I don't have them with me today.
They have a process to unattach a child. That's scary.
Well, yeah, to get them into adoption or with their foster care families, sometimes they cut off contact immediately, especially when they're taking newborns.
What right does DCYF have to take a newborn?
Well, it depends. If there are children that are abused and that do need this system.
Right.
But the problem is that DCYF isn't always paying attention to them, the children that really need their help, even though there's multiple calls on their call logs about one child who really needs help or, has come to school bruised and teachers are calling and nothing's being done. And then there's these families that, really have done nothing, or they're getting a divorce and, it's an acrimonious divorce and one party brings an issue forward.
What is the solution for this? How do we get this to be uniform so that they're actually doing their job right? Who are they answering to? They're obviously not answering to the legislature. The Attorney General said that they don't have to listen to us. So
no, the Attorney General's office is there to protect them.
All right. So the Attorney General's office is protecting this agency, which has accountable to who?
Really nobody, because the only thing that it appears that will happen eventually is because they failed their second round of CFSRs. If Maggie Bishop can't.
Who's Maggie Bishop?
Maggie Bishop, is the director of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. If she cannot get this agency up to par, you really won't have to worry about it because it'll only be enough of whatever the state is willing to fund because the federal government won't fund it. Actually, the federal government has started doing the dollar audits to see if they're using the money in the correct places, and because they're failing audits, to know they're not using it appropriately. So I think it's somewhere around $54 million is being paid back to the federal government.
This draws a nasty question then. Is this why there's no transparency in the federal money that's already going to all these agencies? In other words, there's all this federal money, this Title IV money, Title D money, D2 or D4. I'm still confused.
Capita, and there's
it's very difficult to track.
Funds. It is.
In other words, $2 million comes into the state. We can only track 45,000 of it in our budget because it gets funneled off into all these nonprofits. Is that a way to hide this money?
It could be. What DCYF does is you can see what DCYF spends money on.
Right.
So, and then you can see what Department of Children, Youth, and Families spends money on their line items. So I guess what would be concerning is when you look at child and family services, how much they're spending there, it says 0. But the federal government under capita and TANF, or TANF, they have a separate line item, but they said that they're getting, like maybe $1 million or a little bit more for child and family services. That's direct services, but you can't match it up to the governor's transparency report because he's only telling you what we spent, not what we receive from the federal government to offset those expenses, which in most cases under Title II, Title IV, capita, all of those, it's about 75% reimbursement. No matter how lackluster their services are, that's what they're getting in every state. And
the purpose for this federal funds is to keep families together.
Right. It's
not
pretty
not
much,
to farm them out into adoption.
No, although there was an adoption incentive act that was put out, I think, I want to say the Clinton administration, that was giving $10,000 back to the states for every adoption that happened in a year, on top of the other expenses involved in the adoption process. Giving tax incentives to parents that were adopting. And then, but there's young mothers that have children and, are being coerced into giving their children up for adoption, or their children are taken for adoption, and that wasn't really what they wanted to do.
Interesting. So at this point, it's very critical that the viewers know that they do have rights under 169C.
Right. They should talk to an attorney if they can afford it. The state no longer affords an attorney.
As of when? Isn't that of 2011?
July 2011.
Who came up with this order or this rule?
It appears that it was attached to another bill. So when the Judicial Committee's budget got cut, they cut out a lot of the other services that they were providing, because instead of getting rid of, multiple employees that when you walked into any clerk's office are doing nothing.
We'll fix you. We'll just take away your court-appointed attorney.
Right. So they took away the fund for guardian ad litem. So in a family law case, there's no funding for an indigent parent to get help with a guardian ad litem. In a 169C case, if you're indigent, you have no one to help protect your rights because the public assistance is really backed up and can't handle all the cases. A lot of time there's conflicts of interest between the attorneys doing pro bono work and the state because they've worked on other cases. So the parents are not having attorneys. So they walk into these courtrooms. Now imagine. So number one, you're upset. Somebody's made this heinous report about you that only you know is not true.
Prove it.
Yeah, but
Prove you're innocent.
But it's supposed to be the prosecutor that's proving you guilty. And the standard is so low, it's more likely than not. They take hearsay evidence in this hearing, and it's all behind closed doors. So the law says that, you can take somebody in with you, but the reality is DCYF objects every time. So people can't have somebody in there. So when you're going to a job interview, you have a pad, you have a pen, you're a little nervous. Imagine going to a court to assess your parenting skills. You're just like, what happened? How did I get here? And then they're using words like, abusive or neglect, and their definition of neglected child is somebody who's been abandoned by their parents, who's without proper parental care, control, subsistence, education as required by law, or other care or control necessary for his physical, mental, or emotional health. When it is established that his health has suffered or is very likely to suffer serious impairment, and it's not due to their lack of financial means, so they can be poor, but yet they're going and taking kids.
So then you get tripped up on definitions of, well, what is their health? Is it their mental health? Is it?
Yeah, their physical, mental, or emotional health.
I've seen this a number of times. We've gone over this a number of times in committee, and we constantly refer to it. And parents are struggling because they need to know their rights, and they're finding after the fact that they've been violated.
Right. So, I mean, if they're in a divorce, the first thing you want to do is grab your divorce file and look at it, because jurisdiction, if the allegations are similar to something that the other party brought against you in the Superior Court, it's already there. To come here and do it under the 169C in the district court on a lower standard is double jeopardy. But they do it all the time. And why? Because the hearings are closed door. There's no accountability to the public that they serve. I mean, if people were just coming in, or other attorneys were coming in to view the cases, I don't think this would be happening. There are like 17 states that have opened the courtrooms, and they have not reclosed them. And they have much better numbers now, and they're meeting the federal goals.
So
The court's supposed to, if the child's taken for protective custody, they're supposed to have a hearing within 24 hours so you know where that child is. My parents, like, freaking out calling the police station, and they won't tell them anything, and the police were with them. Or if they don't,
and the parents have a right to know where the child is then?
Right.
And you're saying that the police departments are not coming forth with the information?
No, because a lot of times they're not even involved. The social workers went, they took a child out, they put them into emergency foster care, they get a court order, and sometimes, in several cases that I know you guys have heard, there was no court order to take them out of the house. You know, they're supposed to be...
Are you saying there's a problem here in New Hampshire?
I am. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going on across the United States, but New Hampshire, especially, it's really terrible when you have a proceeding where it can be originated by any person filing a petition with a judge or clerk in the judicial court in which the child is found or resides, alleging neglect or abuse of a child. But nobody brings those petitions forward because they can just make an anonymous call to central intake and tell their story, and then these parents have to answer to it and dispute it, when in actuality it should be the prosecutor looking for the facts to fit it.
Right. I believe that we were trying to introduce 591, but the Health and Human Child and Family Law in New Hampshire, our committee, they said, well, there isn't a problem here in New Hampshire. But a lot has to do with the clear and convincing evidence of parents being adjudicated as either unfit or fit.
It's not even clear and convincing. It's more likely than not. And it includes hearsay.
And that's what we're trying to get rid of. We have to get rid of the fact that, here, if a person is accused of pedophilia, and somebody says, listen, that guy over there, I know he's doing this to that child. He has more rights. The person who's being accused has more rights than a parent in New Hampshire, because a parent can be accused of something even less than that, and that child will be taken away from you. But if you accuse somebody of that heinous crime of pedophilia or rape, hey, well, we got to see the evidence. We got to go. It's got to be clear and convincing, because that person has his rights.
Well, they're supposed to get a medical exam of that child right away, whether it's anybody on the outside. A lot of cases it's an extended family member. But even if it was a parent, they're supposed to get a medical exam, but under 169C12C, like Charlie, they're supposed to be able, a parent who's a subject of an abuse or neglect petition not involving sexual abuse shall be entitled to request a medical exam of each child involved by a licensed physician of the parent's choice at the parent's expense within 72 hours of the first official notice of the complaint received by the parent. where the department has assumed protective supervision or legal custody of the child and an examination of the child is necessary to verify or review an allegation of injury, the department shall cooperate with the request and shall transport the child to the physician's office for examination, provided the physician's office is within a reasonable distance of the district office that is conducting the abuse or neglect investigation. The transportation of a child to a physician's office that is located within the state of New Hampshire shall be presumed to be reasonable under this section. Here's the problem. If they take a bath, anything, the next day, if they're not taken to a hospital right away to be assessed, it's gone.
Right.
You know, they lose everything.
But I guess the reason I brought up that point is that parents seem to be losing rights on an ongoing basis based upon hearsay, whereas the standards of evidence has changed for anybody else. That they don't even have a preponderance of guilt. It's based on hearsay.
It's based on hearsay.
And, well, in the interest of the child, we're going to go with that because we can't make a mistake. However, in this case over here, where pedophilia is being accused, wow, you know, we got all this evidence we got to go through. We can't just destroy this guy's rights and totally wreck his reputation after all. And that's where the problem is. We're trying to fix this so that parents have equal protection under the law.
Exactly. I mean, it starts when they issue a summons and notice. Parents have to know, they have to know their rights. And I think we have to make up an easier way to present their rights to them because the brochure that's provided doesn't show it.
And not every parent gets that brochure either, from what I understand.
No, they're still not. And the legislators made it a law because...
Hey, it's just a law. You know.
No, the child protection workers are like, oh no, it actually says. Division for Children, Youth, and Families.
These are
networks,
the protocols.
These are the protocols.
And we talked about that the last time you were on the show.
Yeah, they're just suggestions.
Yeah. Now, what I understand is you're going to be having your own show.
I am.
And now there's two. One's called the Fairy Tale Festival.
Something. They're still voting on it on Facebook.
All right, so Fairy Tale something.
Fairy Tale something. It's about the fairy tales that, instead of once upon a time, they're happening right now all around you. It's the people that contribute to the Fairy Tale Festival that make that magic happen. It's the actors in it. It's meeting, you know, the actors as the actors themselves or as their character.
Now, you had about 5,000 people visiting the Fairy Tale this year, Fairy Tale Festival.
I did.
Fantastic. So it's...
And every child went home with a free book about travel, Gulliver's Travels, and a couple of other books are traveling and coloring, and it was very cute. And we went around the world in 180 minutes traveling west.
Next year, when is it scheduled?
Next year, it is scheduled for the third Saturday in July. I believe it's the 21st or the 20th. It's the 20th next year, I believe. And it's always from 9 or 10 in the morning until 1. It's a 3-hour event.
It's a great idea. Now, I want to get to your other show. What is the name of your other show, or are you still working on that? It has to do with being... It has to do with being your legal toolbox. What parents are going to need to know. We're going to have different guests from guardian ad litems that are well-respected in their fields, or different attorneys talking about different parts of laws that affect families. So whether it, right here in New Hampshire, so whether it's bankruptcy, whether it is some funding that's available to help people save their homes, because there is a large settlement with all of the banks, and the Attorney General's office has a huge portion of it that hasn't been fully distributed yet because people don't widely know about it. So we'll bring out issues like that. Will that be tied to your website, the show?
It will be.
What is your website?
My website is dmvc-results. It's a blog. And then the Fairy Tale Festival is under the Fairy Tale Festival.
Speak Up's definitely about getting the word out here in New Hampshire. And, of course, we appreciate you coming on the show and being a guest and helping people with understanding some of their rights. I know how in-depth this can get. And I know that the problem is, it just keeps growing and growing, and we're finding different avenues that need.
They need to demand information. They need to stand up for their rights. They need to ask for evidence. They need to bring in their witnesses. They need to demand that their witnesses are there. They need to cross-examine the people that are being brought in. If a doctor reported
And you need to
this,
line your facts up. You need to get your facts lined up.
You need to line your facts up. You need to look at that, call in, and decide, figure out when this person called in. So if they said, something happened at your home, and they gave an approximate time, show where you were, get witnesses, tell them where you really were. If they said, you had an inappropriate conversation with your child about something, well, who heard it? And on top of it, where does that fit into neglect?
Avoid being a victim of the state. Be proactive.
Be proactive. Ask for all the information in your case. Keep demanding it. Ask for a contact log, because a contact log will show that everybody that the division spoke with on a continuous basis.
And they have to provide that.
They have to provide that. And if they don't, you can call the ombudsman's office.
Ombudsman, yes. I know I
Thank
have a hard
you.
time with that word myself.
So them, and then what you want to do is take that contact log to find out what your rights are right there, right then when it's going on. And the most important part is that you have a right to appeal that they do not tell you about. It's under 169C 28.
And they can get that information from you, though, when they call you on your website, too, if people need some
Right.
help from you. Now, obviously, we can't talk about how much you
Well,
charge.
I can't give them legal advice, but I can, you can look through it, and it's all highlighted. The appeals, they can take to the Superior Court, so it's not like they have to go to the Supreme Court to appeal it. It's so much easier, and it's called a de novo appeal, which is really important, because a de novo appeal means that it's going to be heard anew, and it's going to be heard in front of a judge under a higher standard of proof.
De novo.
De novo.
De novo. Well, we're going to be closing up this segment of Speak Up right now, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show. I know we could continue, and there's lots of issues, but the reason I asked you to come back on the show was to let the people know that you're out there as a resource. It's critical that people start using these resources, and not that you're expensive, because you're not, and I can't talk about really the money end of it, but by finding you and doing the research, they can save a lot of heartache and a lot of trouble.
Right, and if they can't afford it, at least they can look at the blog. They can type in different things like due process or rights, and they can see different stories about different situations, and all my research that I've done is posted there, and it'll give them links to everything that they need to know their rights. If they just simply don't know how to access information in the New Hampshire Supreme Court system, they can shoot me an email, and I'm like, oh, click, it's here. Just go in and type in the number. Is it a 169C case, or are you getting a divorce? So it's either 169C or 461A. They type it in, it'll give them all of their rights. They simply need to read through it and be proactive about pushing for their rights and finding out the forms. And the website for the state government with the judicial branches is getting a little bit better, but there are things that are hard to find, and there's several people that help out, and we'll just, we'll say, all right, we'll cover that, because a lot of people have asked for it. So we'll be like, oh, you go here, and go over here. We'll try to give page clips where we can to make it easier, but.
Well, thank you again, and
My pleasure.
please contact Denise, and if you are grateful for this show and want it to continue, please let us know by emailing us at speakupnh@gmail.com, or write us a letter at 68 Bartimus Trail, Nashua, New Hampshire, 03063. We're looking for sponsors and for people to come on the show. If you have an issue, I'd love to hear from you. If you can document your case, we definitely want to be a voice for you to get the word out about issues that may be concerning other people. So until next week, thank you very much for joining us, and Denise, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether It's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back.